Hi, in this video we're going to look at the medicine lithium and what it does inside the brain to make it a useful treatment for bipolar disorder, depression, also ADHD and drug addiction, but I'm going to focus really on bipolar disorder and depression in this video. My name is Peter Smith. I work as a functional medicine practitioner, coaching people with mental health problems how to use natural remedies to treat and better manage their conditions. If you find this information useful and you'd like to see more, you can subscribe to this channel or follow me on whatever social media you're seeing this on. You can also find a lot more reading material on this subject on my website. Figuring out how lithium works has taken decades. It turns out that lithium doesn't have one big main therapeutic effect like many other medicines and herbs and remedies do. What lithium does, rather, is it has multiple effects. It affects all the neurotransmitters, has an anti-inflammatory effect. It boosts BDNF, downregulates GSK3. When you stack all of those effects together, that produces a very powerful, multi-dimensional therapeutic effect. It really is truly a wonderful medicine for the health of the brain. Just before I get into the scientific explanation of how lithium works, let me ask you, when you think of lithium, do you think of it as a drug associated with this stigma of mental health problems? Because that would be a mistake, because lithium is not really a drug. It's actually an essential mineral that we have to have in our diet. In animal studies where very, very low lithium or no lithium diets were consumed, there was a breakdown in the health of the spleen, the immune system, the reproductive system, and the brain. So we need lithium in the same way that we need magnesium and zinc and iron and selenium. It's not like a toxic mineral like mercury or aluminium that has no useful place being inside your body. And another thing to consider, in nutritional medicine, we are not only interested in deficiencies. We consider what would it be like to take a much higher dose of a nutrient to push the therapeutic effects that that nutrient has. With regard to lithium, preliminary guesses are that we need somewhere between 1 to 2 milligrams to prevent deficiency of lithium. But if you have depression or bipolar disorder, you want to elevate the properties that lithium has in the brain. So then you're looking at somewhere between 10 to 20 milligrams. Sorry, now my numbers are coming from lithium orotate, which is, as a functional medicine practitioner, that's what I use. In conventional medicine, they use much higher doses of lithium carbonate. I have another video on that. Let's begin with considering what lithium does to the neurotransmitters. That's what people are always interested in. Lithium has been shown to have therapeutic effects on all neurotransmitters that have been studied. So serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, acetylcholine, glutamate. Let's begin with lithium's effect on dopamine. In the unipolar, not bipolar, depressed brain, lithium is going to act to enhance dopaminergic activity, and it could be useful in that regard. Lithium doesn't just work in one direction, like boosting low levels of dopamine that you can get with depression. It can also bring down elevated dopamine levels that you can get in mania. That's pretty interesting and complicated for a simple mineral. Most medical substances will work in one direction, whereas lithium can actually work in both. An understanding which I've used to manage my own bipolar disorder and that of my patients very usefully is called the cyclical dysregulation hypothesis. It's really pertaining to dopamine. What happens is, in periods of mania, dopamine levels are very elevated and accentuated. It's like being high on cocaine, really. And then the brain responds by desensitizing the synapses to dopamine, exactly as would happen if you regularly took cocaine. And then eventually, maybe there's some other switching, but when dopamine levels go down or the synapses become too insensitive to dopamine, you then collapse into a prolonged, horrific depression. And lithium's ability to work on down-regulating and up-regulating dopamine are one of the things that makes it very useful. Another thing I'm going to talk about more later is that it boosts neuroplasticity. When the elevated levels of dopamine have desensitized the synapses, what you want is increased neuroplasticity to speed up the recovery time and therefore shorten the depression. Moving on now to serotonin. Lithium has multiple favorable effects on serotonin or serotonergic activity within the brain. It hits serotonin activity on multiple levels. The production, the storage, the release, the sensitivity in the synapses, reduced clearance rate from the synapses, so multiple effects. I personally experienced incredible benefits from lithium on my serotonergic systems. So I had, for more than 15 years, a tendency to low levels of serotonin causing depression. I worked out how I could rapidly boost my serotonin levels. I would take a stack of herbs, the amino acid precursor tryptophan, or 5-HTP, some of you might have heard of, but tryptophan I think is better, or certainly better for me. So I'd had a little stack of things to boost serotonin, and I had to take those every second day for, well, almost 15 years. So my serotonin levels would be going down and I would top them up and bounce along like that. Sometimes I had to take it continuously until I started taking lithium orotate. And since 7 years that I've been on lithium orotate, I've never had to boost my serotonin levels. Now, you might say, well, haven't I just substituted one continuous treatment for another? Not really, because before I was having repeated declining levels of serotonin, and I had to keep topping it up as a sort of an emergency little mini emergency rescue. Whereas now what I've done is regrown and regenerated the serotonergic pathways in my brain to be just beautifully stable. It's also just essentially one pill, whereas before it had to be a whole stack just to work on serotonin. An interesting observation with regard to lithium and serotonin was in this paper here, The Underlying Neurobiology of Bipolar Disorder. In this paper, it discusses that when people with depression but stable on antidepressants are put onto a tryptophan depleting diet, that's depleting them of the building materials they need to manufacture serotonin, it negated the effects of the antidepressants so that they went back into depression. However, when the same type of experiment was done on people with bipolar depression pre-treated with lithium, and I'm going to guess it would have worked for people with unipolar depression pre-treated with lithium, the tryptophan depletion diet did not cause a negation of the effects of the antidepressants, showing that lithium has a really stabilizing effect on your serotonin status. Moving on now to lithium's effects on the neurotransmitter glutamate. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter released in every synapse of the brain, as far as I know. If anybody wants to correct me on that, go ahead. And it increases the speed or sensitivity of activity in the brain. So it increases the sensitivity of the synapses to firing. Glutamate and GABA between them, glutamate stimulates activity in the brain, GABA inhibits it. So one of the things glutamate does is it's one of the two things that sets the whole level of activity within the brain. Glutamate is also involved in learning and memory. In the bipolar brain, during periods of mania, glutamate activity becomes very elevated, so the whole brain is speeded up. I know when my glutamate levels are accentuated, it creates that real intense speed that you get with bipolar mania. Talking too quickly, thinking too quickly, moving too quickly, a diminished need for sleep because you've got so much energy. So when I have elevated glutamate, I might stay awake for 26 hours and then sleep for 5 and then get up because I've got so many ideas I've got to get going and do things. There's also emerging science that elevated glutamate activity, or sensitivity to glutamate actually, is involved in the benzo brain. So people who've been on benzos don't just have a desensitization to GABA, but they may also have an increased sensitivity to glutamate. So down-regulating that increased sensitivity to glutamate is part of the program that I use for benzo recovery and withdrawal. Something to understand about glutamate is not only does it speed the brain up, and in the anxious brain that might intensify experiences of anxiety, but in the manic or bipolar brain, that's going to induce manic behaviors and activity. Glutamate is actually destructive to the neurons and to the brain. Think of it like this. If this neuron is releasing far too much glutamate, too quickly, and it can't be cleared from the synapse, it keeps firing a signal into this receiving neuron so much, and this is firing away, and there's so much activity in it, it can become exhausted and die. It's called glutamate exocytoxicity. The neurons are so excited, they can actually be killed. I think I suffered from that because for many years I didn't properly treat my bipolar disorder. I didn't acknowledge I had bipolar, and I wasn't keeping my glutamate levels low or on lithium, and lithium is very protective against the destructive effects of glutamate, and eventually I think this accumulated in my brain. So by 2012 I was having considerable loss of function due to that phenomenon. However, I'm pleased to say I repaired it. And lithium helped me to repair it because lithium boosts neuroplasticity. Controlling glutamate is so critically important for managing the bipolar brain that I don't just rely on lithium. I actually combine it with other remedies to really get that under control. Let me draw you a diagram to illustrate how lithium downregulates elevated glutamate activity. Okay, what we see here on the left-hand side is a synapse that has got far too much glutamate inside the synaptic cleft, and it's causing overactivation and overstimulation of this receiving neuron. So this neuron is the transmitter, making the glutamate, which I've drawn as red dots, releasing it into the synaptic cleft. And because there's inadequate clearance, the glutamate, after being released, should be cleared, drawn up to the side into glial cells, not very much clearance there. It should be reabsorbed back into the original transmitting neuron, but it isn't. So there's just a really heavy amount of glutamate building up inside this synapse, and then it's really causing this overstimulation of this receiving neuron to the level where it can actually become toxic and just exhaust and deplete and actually kill this neuron. Over on this side, we see the same situation, and yet we've added lithium. And what lithium does is to increase the absorption of the glutamate out of the synaptic space into the glial cells on the side, so we get much more absorption into the glial compared to here, and then you get increased absorption back into the original neuron. So the glutamate is now pooled in here and drained out of the synaptic space. So you see we have much less activity going on, or overstimulation going on, in the receiving neuron. Lithium is doing that. Now, I don't like to use the high dose lithium carbonate because of the potential for toxicity to the kidneys and thyroid. So I choose instead to use low dose lithium orotate. But I want to enhance the effects, and we can accentuate and also increase the clearance rate of glutamate from the synapse with supplementing high doses of zinc, NAC, although you have to be careful with NAC. Moderate doses will help this glutamate clearance, but high doses will actually increase dopamine, and that could flip a person up into mania. The other one is glycine. Again, got to know what you're doing with glycine. Initially, glycine will actually increase activity on this receiving membrane, but with chronic use, it will actually help to clear the pooled glutamate inside the synapse. Moving on, lithium exerts positive effects on acetylcholine production, and this may be one of the reasons why it helps with cognitive decline and as a preventative for Alzheimer's disease, although that theory is falling out of favor, the acetylcholine hypothesis of Alzheimer's disease, rather in favor of the loss of neuroplasticity and building up a plaque and so forth, and lithium works on that. And lastly, what does lithium do to GABA? Well, it definitely upregulates GABA activity. There's studies that have shown that. But another thing that lithium may do for GABA activity is it may either increase the recovery of the synapses that have been desensitized by benzo drugs, which could be a useful thing, or additionally is growing brand new synapses to take over from the desensitized synapses that are a consequence of benzo drugs. One more notable thing to add with regard to lithium and GABA is, sadly, my clinical experience is lithium is not a useful medicine for most people with anxiety. You would think it would be if it has a GABAergic effect and a serotonergic effect, but it just hasn't worked out that useful. I mean, I've given lithium to thousands of patients over the years. I've been in practice for 30 years, and very few, if any, I don't actually remember any people with anxiety coming back to me and saying, oh yeah, now the lithium is really helping me. According to the scientific studies, lithium may help protect people that are subject to stress-induced anxiety. So if you're sort of like, you're okay unless you have periods of stress and then the anxiety comes on, lithium may be prophylactic against that. The other thing though, which does pertain to anxiety, is if you have anxiety-induced depression. Now follow me on this. A lot of people think, well, I'm depressed because I have anxiety. Because, depression and anxiety often go together. Well, we now know the neurological mechanism that actually causes that. Anxiety keeps triggering and overactivating stress physiology in the body. The stress signals are sent down by the vagus nerve and the hormonal pathway, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. The result of those overactivity in those stress responses ramps up inflammation levels in the brain, and then the inflammation attacks key structures that control mood, the hippocampus and the cortex. So you actually get a loss of function in the areas of the brain that control mood, resulting in depression. And it's the anxiety sort of mediated through inflammatory responses that's induced that. Lithium is a great treatment for that type of depression. Depression that's induced by stress and inflammatory responses and a loss of neuroplasticity. I mean, that's what lithium targets, as I'm going to go on to say. So if you've got anxiety with depression, consider lithium to target the depression. Okay, moving on from neurotransmitters, one of the most significant things that lithium does for the brain is it enhances what is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity means different things. In this context I'm referring to, it's the ability of the brain to protect and maintain the existing synapses, pathways and structures, to keep neurons alive longer and maintain the synaptic connections. And the reason this matters so much for depression and bipolar depression is because brain scans have shown there is a loss of synaptic connections in key structures of the brain that control mood during periods of depression. We now know that depression doesn't cause a loss of neuroplasticity, it's the other way around. Something causes a loss of synaptic connections, usually inflammation or maybe other things, a loss of synaptic connections in key structures of the brain that control mood, and that then results in depression. In bipolar depression, you have the same thing, the loss of connections, but it may be preceded by toxicity from excess glutamate, which I showed earlier, and that might put too much stress and strain on the neurons, and if you don't have the neuroplastic ability to protect your brain, then those neurons are going to get burned out, you're going to lose synaptic connections and plunge down into depression. Scans have shown in the cortex and hippocampus of the depressed and bipolar depressed brain there's actually shrinkage. And this is due to a loss of synaptic connections. Now, before you get depressed about that, the good news is that synaptic connections can regrow. So a neuron comes along like this and then grows these branches off the end, and the branches sort of wiggle around looking for a neighbor to connect to. Where they connect on the sides, and they'll make multiple connections, those connections are the synapses. Let me show you a diagram that changed my life. Before I saw this diagram, I didn't want to take lithium. I thought of lithium as a toxic substance. I saw this diagram and I thought, I want to know how to use lithium. I want the benefits of lithium without the toxic side effects. And here I am some 12 years later showing you how you can do that. Now, here we go. So I said a neuron comes along. This is a normal state. A neuron comes along, grows the branches on the end. You see there's a good number of branches. And if we blow up this small area here, so that you just see the branch individually, you'll see on the side there are these bumps. They're called dendritic spines. I think of them like hands being held out, waiting for a neighbor to grow a dendrite and then connect. And where they connect are the synapses. So good number of branches, good number of dendritic spines. That's a normal state. This is the brain in a depressed state. You probably can't read it down here, but it says low levels of BDNF, so there's inadequate neuroplastic protection. You see that there's a loss of the branches or dendrites, and there's also a loss of the dendritic spines. So what you have here is a diminished number of synapses. This is the same neuron, but after heavy dose lithium treatment. You see that the branches have grown fantastically, and if you look at the spines, they've sprouted back. In fact, this lithium treated brain actually looks better than just a normal brain. And of course, and there was also recovery from depressive behavior. When I first saw this, I was depressed when I was looking at this. I thought, okay, there I am in the middle. How do I get over there? When I heard that it was done with high-dose lithium, I thought, well, yeah, but could you show me the rat's kidneys and the rat's thyroid? Because with a high dose of lithium, they were probably in a terrible state. What I then wanted to do was to learn how to use a lower dose lithium orotate and extract that benefit. And in my practice, I combine the low dose lithium orotate, which is safe and non-toxic, with other remedies that boost neuroplasticity to stimulate the regrowth and regeneration of those synapses. The neurons themselves are not dead. It's just they've had their branches trimmed. Here's another impressive diagram. I hope you're going to be able to see this in the video. This is before and after lithium treatment. Do you see the white space here, or the white line on this side of these two brains? This white space indicates that the grey matter on the outside and the white matter on the inside have sort of separated because the grey matter has shrunken and pulled away. So on the brain on this side, you see this white area where the grey matter has shrunken and pulled away from the internal white matter. However, on the lithium treated brain on this side, you see that this white line has really diminished. It's kind of filled in, plumped out the grey matter. Let me try to reorientate your thinking with this new understanding. The old model was, you're depressed because you have too little dopamine or serotonin inside your synapses. This new model says, it's not that you don't have enough serotonin or dopamine inside your synapses. It's that because of a loss of plasticity and because of pruning, you don't have enough serotonin or dopamine synapses left to carry your serotonin, hold it and carry it and transport it. Overall, yes, you have diminished dopamine or serotonin activity, but it's more actually a loss of synapses than a loss of the actual neurotransmitter in each synapse. The old model was, well, let's just boost the levels of neurotransmitters in the remaining synapses. We didn't know to do any better than that. The new model is let's regrow those synapses. And this is absolutely possible. The brain is far more neuroplastic than we used to think it was. There's many things you can do to boost neuroplasticity, but don't miss out on lithium. I would say lithium is the single most powerful remedy that I have in my medicine chest for boosting neuroplasticity. Just to mention while I'm here, another time when you want to consider boosting neuroplasticity and using lithium is following drug use. If you're recovering from a recreational drug habit or prescription medications such as benzos, what you're wanting to do is to regrow brand new synapses as quickly as possible. If you have benzo desensitized synapses, well, grow brand new ones right next to them that have never seen benzos. I first started doing that 2013, helping people transition off benzos and antidepressants and cocaine and other drugs, and it really has speeded up the recovery. Now I can target neuroplasticity and really speed up that recovery process. Moving on now to lithium's effects on inflammation. The reason inflammation matters so much is because in the brain you have these two dynamic forces going. You've got the neuroplastic abilities, how much BDNF and other neurotrophic factors can you produce to protect and repair neurons once they've been damaged or even lost, and synapses once they've been lost. Versus on the other hand, you've got like wear and tear and actually damaging factors. The damaging factors primarily include inflammation, but also free radicals, oxygen-free radicals, and something else called nitrosative stress. And it turns out lithium does both. Lithium is a very powerful neurological anti-inflammatory and antioxidant protecting against oxidative stress. So it's really working both sides of that balance, and that makes it a very powerful agent for boosting neuroplasticity. One of the ways that we know lithium reduces inflammation is that it controls one of the fats or fatty acids in the diet and in our bodies called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is very rich in chicken and corn-fed chicken and so forth. It is a pro-inflammatory fatty acid. When you flood the brain through your diet with high levels of arachidonic acid, then the cell membranes in your brain are very quick to produce an inflammatory response. And lithium suppresses excess arachidonic acid inflammatory responses. Another thing you can use to enhance control of arachidonic acid and suppress inflammation, so this is something you would use alongside your low-dose lithium orotate to enhance its effectiveness, is essential fish oils, the essential oil EPA specifically. Although it looks like genetically the bipolar brain has more of an issue with delivering DHA, which is one of the components of fish oil, to the frontal lobes. I found that I would take high doses of DHA along with lithium, and it wasn't really producing the effects I was looking for. When I switched to a higher EPA than DHA, the combination of the EPA and lithium worked synergistically together to really suppress inflammation in my brain and then allow my neuroplasticity to prevail. Moving on to the last significant benefit I'd like to mention that lithium does for the depressed and bipolar brain. It actually has other effects, but this is the last one I'll mention. Lithium suppresses the activity of an enzyme called GSK3. Now, GSK3 is, when it's working well, is involved in producing proteins and protecting neurons and balancing the biological clock. But in the bipolar brain, there is excessive activity of GSK3, and this can have two effects. It can cause a buildup of protein and plaque inside the neurons, which is very unhealthy and accelerates the aging process of the brain. What we want to do is suppress GSK3 to clear that protein out and prevent bipolar disorder, increasing our risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, which it does, but if you take lithium, you can bring the level back down to the same as everybody else, or maybe even better. Another very significant effect is that by inhibiting GSK3, it helps to control the sleep cycles. There is actually a real structure in the brain that runs like a clock. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's sensitive to light from the eyes, which tells it when it's daytime and nighttime. In the bipolar brain, it runs late. This is a real clock that runs the timing of when we wake up, go to sleep, have bowel motions, and so on and so forth. If you want to read more about that, you can find me information in my book, Sleep Better with Natural Remedies. As you probably already know, during periods of mania, there's a significantly diminished need for sleep and also a late running clock, so that you may be awake for, say, 26 hours and then sleep for a few hours and then do another 26 hours, something like that. When I've got mania or hypomania, yeah, my clock runs on at least a 26, sometimes even more, 28-hour cycle, which means that I'm constantly moving out of cycle with the time zone that I'm living in, and it's really disturbing. Learning to directly control your sleep and sleep physiology is in fact another way that you can manage or better manage bipolar disorder. I used to think that when I rebalanced my bipolar disorder, then my sleep cycles and sleep habits would just go back to normal. I then learned that no, actually, if I can use the sleep to treat the bipolar rather than sort of the other way around. And lithium played a key central role in doing that. Here's a little sleep enhancing trick you can use, which is mentioned in my book. If you combine bright blue light exposure together at the same time with a sublingual B12, you want the right type of B12, and you're taking lithium, the effect of this is not just to set the timing of the biological clock, but it will hit you with a bigger surge of melatonin some 16 hours later and help sleep. You can use lithium as a component of the stack of supplements and other procedures you would use to restore healthy sleep physiology and overcome insomnia. So in summary, you can see lithium has multiple therapeutic and beneficial effects on the brain. There's actually more I haven't even mentioned. But as you probably already know, the high-dose lithium carbonate used in psychiatric medicine comes with multiple side effects, including serious irreversible damage to the kidneys, to the thyroid. It can cause tinnitus, hand tremors, and feeling emotionally flat and a loss of libido, which absolutely sucks. Many years ago, when I first saw this diagram, I was in a depressed state and realized that looks like me there with the loss of synaptic connections. How do I get over there? How do I get the benefits of lithium without the toxic side effects? If only there was a way to do that. Well, I believe that there is. Firstly, we can switch over to a lithium orotate. Lithium orotate salts appear to be better absorbed into the brain where we want them, so we don't have to stuff so much into our systemic blood to kind of push it across the blood-brain barrier or push it into the cells of the brain, so that's less toxic to start with. And then we can combine it, as I suggested earlier, with stacks of remedies that support what lithium is doing. You can have a diet that reduces toxic stress on the brain and helps neuroplasticity to help the low-dose lithium orotate to work. And in that way, we can extract the maximum benefit from a low dose of lithium orotate and treat both our depression and bipolar disorder. And that subject, combining lithium orotate with additional remedies, is going to be the subject of my next video post. If this subject is of interest to you and you don't want to miss that post, then subscribe to my channel or follow me on whatever social media you're watching this on. And don't forget to set up the notifications. You can also find a lot more information on my website, balancingbrainchemistry.co.uk. And if you send me an email, I'll be starting a newsletter soon enough. Bye for now.